CrossWay, how's it going? Woo! Yeah, awesome. Just wanted to take a moment to say Happy Mother's Day to you mothers out there. Thank you for spending time with us today to disciple these students awesomely. We're staying in our series on Ruth today. We're going to camp out in chapter 2. We see a second turning point in Ruth's life. Last week we saw with Alyssa that Ruth lost her husband. She's leaving her homeland and she lost that to stay with her mother-in-law, and that God shows up in our message. We learned that all last week. I want to stick in last week for a second to kind of set the stage for today. Names meant a lot to people back in these ancient times that the story was being written. What you were called meant something. And we see this with Naomi when they get back to Bethlehem, and she no longer wants to be called Naomi. She wants to be called Mara. Naomi meant pleasant, or means pleasant, it still does, and Mara means bitter. Now, Naomi's telling everybody through their interactions with her, don't call me pleasant anymore, call me bitter. This is how upset I am. And this feeling changes today, though. We see a little bit of hope coming through Ruth's story to Naomi's bitterness. And she was bitter because she felt stuck, that God was taking things away and not giving back to her. But we're going to see how Ruth's experience changes Naomi's feelings. So we're also going to jump now into chapter 2. We meet somebody in chapter 2 that's vital to Ruth's story. And I think he's got probably the coolest name in the whole Bible. Probably should have named my son this, but Joseph was a family name, so we went with that. His name's Boaz. It's a pretty sweet name. I like it. But he's a relative of Elimelech. And if we remember from last week, Elimelech was Naomi's husband. So Boaz is related to Naomi through marriage. And he owns a grain field, and this grain field will come in extremely important in a little while in Ruth's story. So we know that Naomi and Ruth get back from Bethlehem. Naomi changes her name. She's bitterness. Ruth is kind of like, what's going on? And they knew they had to survive somehow. They had to get something to eat. They had to find a way to move forward with their lives. And Ruth knew a way to survive and to get food. But she also knew this way was going to be extremely dangerous. So Ruth asked Naomi in Ruth 2:2, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I gain favor. So Ruth's going to go out into the field and scrape and scrounge up for any little leftover snippets of stuff that she can get to eat for her and Naomi. She's not going to get the big juicy little M&M that she can really fill her belly on, but she's going to have to get the little schniblets and the crumbs. These are things that the harvesters considered not worth picking up, that should just rot in the ground, the broken stuff. And Ruth's intention is not to steal from these farmers and harvesters. She just wants to utilize what's left for her and Naomi's survival. Now, Ruth needed to get permission to do this in the fields. And we see later on in the story that she does get this permission. But Ruth could have walked to the field and just walked in and started picking up. Or she could have walked over to the field, went to the main guy in charge and said, hey, can I go pick up behind your people? And he said, yeah, and then she goes out. But either way, someone could have seen her come out and say, hey, who's that lady? She doesn't belong here. Let's go get her. They could have harmed her. They could have killed her. They could have had her arrested. And that's not what happens to her, though, because we get more story. But we see that Naomi also knows this danger, but she knows that they need to survive. When she replies to Ruth in 2:2, and it says, Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. Naomi gives Ruth her blessing. What does she have to lose? She's so bitter, she's so upset. What has she got to lose? Her husband's dead, her sons are dead. Other than Ruth, what has she got to lose? So Ruth sets out to glean. So we know that God shows up in our message from last week. And he shows up when times are tough and when times are good. And he shows up even when we're not looking for him. But God shows up for Ruth and Naomi in their tough times. Ruth was in a new place, scrounging for grain in a field where she had no idea who owned it, no idea who the people around her were, who she was interacting with. And how does God show up? God shows up by providing for Ruth. This isn't the fancy provision we see with Jesus multiplying the bread and the fish to feed the thousands of people, or the manna falling from the sky for the Israelites in the wilderness. Nope. This is the type of provision you and I see every single day. God led Ruth to the right field at the exact right time. And we can see this in Ruth 2:4-7. It states, "Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvester. 'The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you,' they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, 'Who does this young woman belong to?' The overseer replied, 'She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained from morning until now, except for a short rest in the shelter.'" So Boaz shows up as she's harvesting. The guy whose field it is shows up and is like, "Who is that?" Instead of Boaz getting there and saying, "Hey, who's that lady? Go get her." He just is like, "What's going on here?" He just asked for clarification. He could have went that opposite way and something bad could have happened to Ruth, but it didn't. God provided for Ruth by guiding her to Boaz's field, Boaz showing up exactly when he did, and Boaz having a soft heart for Ruth. But we see God's continued provision for Ruth when Boaz actually speaks with her. 2:8-9 says, "So Boaz said to Ruth, 'My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay with the women who work for me and watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled.'" Now God is providing an extra layer for Ruth, his protection. He's giving her his protection. She's giving him a chance, or giving Ruth a chance to drink when she is thirsty. And Boaz knows how dangerous what Ruth is doing. Anybody can harm her. It doesn't have to be Boaz telling them to harm her. It could just be one of the harvesters getting it in his head and harm her. But Boaz said to his people, "Don't touch her." So he wants her to be safe. And Boaz shows Ruth that God's provision is going to continue to her. When he's talking with her at the end of this, he says, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded for the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." So there's a lot more that happens in this story. Boaz invites Ruth to rest and eat with him. He even allows her to take some of the leftover grain that the harvesters have collected and they've roasted to eat for Naomi. And he tells his harvesters to, as they're harvesting, take stalks out of their bundle and drop it behind them for Ruth to gather. So she's getting full-fledged stalks and not the little scraps that she was getting. So God's continuously providing for Ruth. God provides for us too. This isn't something that happened and doesn't happen anymore. And his provision comes to us in many, many different ways. It could be the divine intervention, just something miraculously happening to improve your life. It could be other people's actions or their words or just their relationship with them. Or it could just be God giving us the wisdom to make the good decisions that we need to make. And I know all of you have experienced God's provision. I sure have. I know when I experience God's provision, I don't necessarily see it right away. It usually takes me looking back at the situation, being like, what happened? How did this happen? And being like, oh, okay, that came from God. A couple of years ago, I had an important meeting that I needed to be at, and had a time set with the person I was meeting with, and he's like, "Dan, I got a busy day. We got 30 minutes for this meeting. It's going to take us every single second of that 30 minutes. Make sure your butt's there because we're going to take it all." I said, "Cool. I'm usually early to things. I like to be 15 minutes early, otherwise I consider myself late." But that day I was running late. And of course, I hit traffic on my way there, and it's like, all right, I get to the parking lot with 5 minutes to spare, and it's going to take me 5 minutes to walk from my car up the elevator into his office. Thinking, all right, let's rush. So I kind of sped walk through the parking lot, get to the door, hold it open, pull it open for myself, and I see an older lady walking with a walker coming up. So I'm like, do the right thing. I held the door open for her, and it seemed like she was taking forever, the slow little walk. And I'm just thinking to myself, let's just go. She gets close enough, And she starts chatting with me, and I'm chatting back with her, but in my head I'm thinking, come on, come on, come on, I gotta go. She gets through the door, she's going one way, I'm going the other. She says, thank you. I say, you're welcome, no problem. I get to the elevator, get up, speed walk through the halls to the office where I was supposed to be, and he's not there. And I'm like, oh man, you messed up holding that door for that lady. Should have just walked through. She would have been fine. So I pull out my phone to call the guy that I was meeting, and I see a text from him, and it's like, Dan, my bad, I had some things pop up, but I had to move around, so I moved a couple meetings around. I'm going to be like 20 minutes late. We got plenty of time for your meeting. Don't worry about it. All right, cool. I was like, sweet. A couple days later, I'm looking back at it. I'm like, God really did provide that for me. I took time out of my day to help that elderly lady out, so God gave me the extra time that I needed for the meeting. So chapter 1 tells us that Ruth turns to God when she states to Naomi, your God is my God. She gives up her old ways and jumps into faith with God. And God also shows his faithfulness to Ruth through her story. We're going to see more of this faithfulness a little bit later in the story, next week and the week after, but today we're going to see where it starts. We see when Ruth talks to Naomi, she's speaking of his faithfulness, because then Ruth the Moabite said, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they have finished harvesting all my grain. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter. Go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. So I told you, Naomi knew, too, that it was going to be difficult and it was going to be dangerous, but she let her do it anyway. Naomi had a little bit of faith that she was going to be okay, even though she was bitter and she was upset. And Ruth had faith that she was going to be okay because Naomi gave her her blessing. And we see God's faithfulness through this because Boaz tells her to stay and continue through the harvest. That could take a day or two, it could take a month. I don't know how big the field was, but it could have been a while. And Boaz tells her to stay with the women and to stay in the field and be employed and be safe. Ruth had no idea what her situation would be like the next day, the next week, the next month, even the next year. She had no idea of this land that she was in now. She had no previous knowledge of it. She had no idea what the intentions of the people she was interacting with. She knew Naomi and that was it. But she trusted Naomi and knew that Naomi knew what she was doing when she brought him to Bethlehem, and she knew that Naomi trusted in God. So she in turn put her trust. She trusted God as a new believer. She started out faithful. God shows his faithfulness through Ruth. And we see that Naomi's bitterness changes towards the end of the story. It starts to change. It's the seed of change in her. Ruth 2:20 states, the Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Naomi is seeing God's faithfulness through Boaz's actions and seeing God's provision through Boaz's actions. And she's turning back to being pleasant. She's praising God in her statement. She's praising Boaz in his statement. She's being pleasant and not like, well, he just had to do that, and being bitter. But God is faithful even when we don't know where we're going or why. He's faithful when we don't do the things we're supposed to do. He's faithful when we argue with our parents. He's faithful even when we have fights with our friends or even our boyfriends or girlfriends. And he's faithful even when we disrespect each other. God will always be faithful to us because he strives to be in relationship with every single human. He strives to be in relationship not with those who are believers, but with everybody. And he's faithful even when we think we don't deserve it. If God was only faithful when God felt like it, or it was convenient for God, or he was providing for us, that's the only times he was faithful, or he was faithful when we decided to walk the path of following his every command, God wouldn't be acting in the way that we know God to be characteristic of loving, faithful, and generous. Jesus was an example for us for how to walk in faithfulness with God and receive God's faithfulness back. Because God practices his faithfulness with us in every moment of every day. He shows his faithfulness to his entire creation, not just us believers. And he shows his faithfulness through his provision that he provides for us. Ruth was a new believer, yet she received God's faithfulness, his provision, and protection. She received God's provision even before she was a believer. Before she said to Naomi, your God is my God. She received his provision and his protection. Naomi could have said to Ruth, get out of here, you're no longer my family. Or Ruth could have said, all right, you want me to leave them out like Oprah did. But she decided to stay, and she decided to follow her mother-in-law. If Ruth would have left, she would have never had the opportunity to meet Boaz. And she would have never became the great-grandmother of David. So as the worship team comes up, I want to challenge you guys all tonight. I want you to take note of the small things in your life and pick something that you can faithfully do each and every day. Just for this first week and see how it sticks. It could be something as simple as taking 30 minutes out of each day in silence and in solitude and praying with God. Or it could be something as complex as finding a new student each day at school and praying with them. I want you to do it each day. I want you to remember God's faithfulness to you, your faithfulness to God, and what God is providing for you in your life, even if you don't recognize it right away. Trust that God sees it and is with you. Be the faithfulness that God is to those around you. So now what I want to do is I want to take a couple of minutes to open up the front. Come in the front, pray if you're feeling a little bitter about your life, a little bitter about your situation with God, like you're losing hope, you're losing faith. If you feel like you're stuck in a situation you can't get out of. If you feel like you're trying to mend a fence with somebody and you just can't see the fruits of your labor. If you need anything to be lifted off of your heart that's weighing heavy, come up and pray. I'm going to have Ethan, Madeline, and Libby come up and pray with you guys. So we're going to take some time, but if you're not comfortable to come up and pray with us, definitely take some time and pray at your seat. But I encourage all of you that need prayer to come up and pray. So we'll just take some time and some silence and pray. The front is open. Be the Boaz to someone's Ruth. If you aren't Ruth yourself, be that light for other people. Will you pray with me? Father God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity to walk through Ruth. Thank you for the faithfulness that you show each and every day to all of us. I pray that I can show you my faithfulness, and I pray that these students and volunteers can do the same. God, I thank you for your provision. I thank you for everything that you have done and will do for us. I pray that your provision is seen by these students, and I pray that these students feel your presence in their hard times. I pray that any student that is questioning their faith can feel your provision, your faithfulness, and your presence daily. I pray that all students present here can be a beacon of your faithfulness to others. Holy Spirit, if any of these students are feeling bitter towards anything in their lives, soften their hearts, clear their minds. Fill them with your love and your healing. Do a mighty work in their lives, God. We thank you and we love you. I pray this all in the powerful name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right, guys.